Protests against a proposed nuclear plant on India's western coast have turned violent, with one activist killed in police firing. Jetapur, where the 10,000 megawatt plant is to be built, has seen long-running anger against land acquisition intensify following the nuclear crisis in Japan.
We do not want this project here. The children of this village will be affected. The authorities can say anything today, but it is always the common man who suffers later.
The resistance has hardened since the Japanese earthquake and tsunami that crippled the Fukushima plant, forcing a rethink on nuclear safety around the world and calls in India for a halt to atomic expansion.
One aspect of the learning from Fukushima is engineering design point of view. Okay, what failures happen, and that you need not only have one substitute system, but maybe you need to have multiple power system, for example, to run your cooling system. Okay, that's what Fukushima teaches us. Fukushima also teaches us that there cannot be a 100% safe nuclear power plant. I think you can keep designing it, you can have all the system in place, but you cannot foresee the kind of natural disaster that can strike a nuclear power plant.
The town of Madbun seems very far from Fukushima, yet it is near here the French nuclear company Areva plans to build the world's largest nuclear facility at a cost of $24 billion. Local farmers claim they were not consulted and the land is being acquired at a mere $11,000 per acre. But officials say they are willing to increase the compensation, something the villagers now refuse to accept.
This land is the land of our forefathers. We have the authority to manage it, but not to sell it. We cannot set up this kind of village anywhere else with this quality of land around it. So even if the government is ready to offer us huge compensation and relocate us elsewhere, we don't want to leave our village.
Ramdas Vagdare, meanwhile, still tries to cultivate his field that lies inside the project site. He sneaks in when he can because his family is dependent on the crop.
The police tell me my land now belongs to the government and I can't grow my crops there. They stop me from entering my field.
This is just one of the many battles across India between villagers and industrial projects. The government has approved several new sites to build reactors, taking the country's nuclear sites from 7 to 13. But most of these sites face protests over land acquisition. And now, with the crisis in Japan, the government is on the defensive.
Well, yes, of course, it creates a sense of a panic amongst people. And nobody wants a nuclear plant in their vicinity. That's it. But we are not looking at nuclear plants at the coast which could be hit by a tsunami. So safety concerns will have to now be re-looked at so that people are more reassured and even government is more cautious.
There are also fundamental questions being raised about the simple economics of nuclear power.
One of the questions that people in India is asking today is nuclear power cheap as it has been made out to be? What is it from the public money that will go in supporting nuclear power? So we need to know what it will cost us, just in economic sense. Second, what will be the environmental cost of nuclear power? You know, after all, it is a very, very water intensive process. Even if we are taking seawater, it will have a huge impact on marine ecology because we will be discharging hot water. Then there is issue of safety, radiation, waste disposal.
Yet there are those who believe recent events have led to the dangers of nuclear power being blown out of proportion.
It is not as unsafe as its critics claim. It is not 100% risk-free. No form of energy ever is. But nuclear power is safer than the main alternative in India, which is coal power stations, because coal stations emit large amounts of carbon dioxide, the main greenhouse gas, which is extremely unsafe, not only for India, but for the rest of the world.
India has little choice but to add a lot more nuclear power. It suffers from a peak hour power deficit of about 12% that acts as a brake on the growing economy and causes blackouts in much of the country. 500 million of its people still lack electricity.
We have to look not only at what electricity is currently used for, but at all energy, so oil and heating as well, Much of that could and should be running on electricity in the future so that we don't have to burn oil. And to do that, we need to get more low-carbon electricity, including nuclear. So I think that nuclear will have a rising proportion of energy in Asia and in the rest of the world until we can be 100% renewable.
But for global nuclear suppliers, India's recent nuclear liability law remains a sticking point. The legislation limits the liability of a nuclear reactor operator following a nuclear accident to $325 million and allows lawsuits against the suppliers of the technology. Following the crisis in Japan, there are now calls in India to increase this liability even further, to provide for decontamination and compensation. This could put even more pressure on foreign suppliers.
The government will have to reduce its ambition on nuclear power. The government today is saying that it will set up 30,000 megawatt. Obviously, that is not going to happen because of heightened public concern about nuclear power plant. That's point number one. Secondly, the government will have to put everything in the public domain if it wants to have nuclear power plant. And there must be concerted debate on each and every project. And it must take the consent of people before it can set up project. It cannot push nuclear power plant in people's backyard anymore.
Even if the villagers in Madban manage to derail the Jetapur plant, India is unlikely to back down from its broader nuclear ambitions, given its surging power demand and a lack of alternatives. This will come as welcome news to a global nuclear industry reeling from the fallout of the crisis in Japan.